tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hello and welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, David McKnight, bestselling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and Tax-Free Income for Life, all of which can be bought in single copy on Amazon or wherever you buy fine books, or in bulk at davidmcknightbooks.com, where you can mix and match titles and achieve bulk discounts. If you're looking for someone to help you navigate all the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, why not head over to davidmcknight.com, hook you up with a member of our elite POZ advisor group. These advisors are among the very best tax-free retirement specialists in the nation. They've been trained, vetted, qualified personally by me. If you are an advisor looking to transition your practice to a tax-free retirement planning practice, you can head over to powerofzero.com and opt into the free 3-part video series, after which you can set up a phone call and have a chat with us. I would love a follow on Twitter. It's at McKnight & Co., at McKnight & Co., or on Instagram, it's David C. McKnight. All right, today we're going to talk about an article that appeared in Barron's, and it's actually an interview with an economist that we've had on our podcast before. The economist's name is Dr. Larry Kotlikoff. Got a lot of respect for Dr. Kotlikoff. I think he's the foremost expert in the world on what we call fiscal gap accounting. And if you recall, what fiscal gap accounting basically does is he projects out over the next 75 years, everything that we promised to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt. He then projects out over that same time period what the revenue that actually is going to be flowing into the U.S. Treasury under today's tax rates. He says, hey, look, if there's a difference between those two numbers, your country has a fiscal gap. That's the true national debt. So he's done a great job of sort of transforming how we should be thinking about a nation's debt. And just because a federal government tells you what their certain debt or prescribes what their debt is, publicly held debt, that doesn't mean that that's actually what their debt really is. He looks at a little bit more like he would a private corporation, all of the outlays that we promised to pay over time versus all of the revenue we're planning on receiving over that same time period. And then he's sort of matching those up against each other and seeing what the shortfalls are. So he's, like I said, he's been on our podcast before, and I think he's really right on a number of different issues. Anyway, there's an article in Barron's entitled, This Economist Says Most Retirement Planning is Wrong. Here's how to think about it. So what I wanted to do, and basically this is an interview with Dr. Kotlikoff that the author, Neil Templin, and by the way, this appeared in Barron's on September 12th, 2021, basically conducts an interview. He managed to get a hold of Dr. Kotlikoff as he was driving around in his car. And that's actually how we got a hold of Dr. Kotlikoff initially, to get him to appear in our movie, The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. So got a hold of him on his cell phone and proceeded to ask him a series of questions about basic financial planning issues to see what his standpoint was. And I think that you will find that he has a couple of surprising points of view when it comes to sort of basic financial planning principles. And I'm going to sort of take what his answers are, and I'm going to sort of evaluate them and put them up against the Power of Zero paradigm. You'll find that I agree with him on some things, but our opinions diverge rather dramatically on other issues. So let's jump right in here. And the first question that they ask him is, what's your basic problem with financial planners? And he says, the whole goal of our life is not to accumulate wealth so people can charge us fees on our assets. It's having the best lifestyle we can, given our resources, so we don't end up living on the street if the market crashes or the house burns down or we live to be 100 years old. So here's my take on it. I know he talks about how you can have a go-it-alone retirement. You don't necessarily need to pay someone a fee to manage your assets, but I think that in some cases it does make sense to have someone hold your hand. And it may even make sense to pay them a fee to do so. And one of the studies that I like to reference frequently shows how, the market over time has performed about 8%. However, if you look at the typical investor's returns over a similar time period, they actually get much closer to 2 to 3%. And there's a good reason for that, because they don't have a guide that's holding their feet to the fire, forcing them to live up to the investment objectives that they stated at the outset of the relationship. and forcing them to stay invested. For example, when the tech bubble popped in 2001, or when the economy went into cardiac arrest with the mortgage crisis in 2008. What most people do that don't have a financial advisor holding their feet to the fire is they participate in emotion-driven investing, which basically, as you know, we're supposed to buy low, sell high. Emotion-driven investing tends to lead people to buy high and sell low. And that's why the average typical investor without an advisor holding their hand every step along the way is going to succumb to those bouts of emotion, and they're not going to stay invested in the market, which means that their market returns are going to suffer. And so I think the average American is not really equipped to go it alone, because you need to be able to commit to an advisor what your investment objective is and have that advisor hold your feet to the fire even when the going gets rough. So that's sort of the first topic that they discussed. The second thing that came up during this interview, he asked the following question. You call for smoothing lifelong consumption. Aren't financial planners doing exactly that by helping people build retirement portfolios? And he says, saving for retirement is a quintessential step in consumption smoothing, but you don't want to undersave or oversave. You want to get this right. Economists are looking at your lifetime resources and figuring what you should spend so you can keep on spending it. They're not asking how much you'd like to spend in retirement, which is the first question most planners ask. My answer to that question is $1 billion a day. It's a ridiculous question. You can only spend what you have. Once you know what you have, you know what you can spend. So I sort of see this a little bit differently. I don't think there's anything wrong with figuring out what your lifestyle should be in retirement in today's dollars and then reverse engineering the amount you would need to save between now and then to be able to pull that off. I think that that's part of the job of a good financial planner, sort of assessing what type of lifestyle you want to have in retirement and then telling you exactly what you need to save to be able to pull that off. And by the way, the one thing that makes the Power Zero paradigm a little bit different than sort of mainstream financial planning is we believe that you have to get the tax part of this equation right, particularly if you believe, as I do, that we're in a rising tax rate environment. In other words, it's not enough to sort of just figure out precisely what you should be saving year in and year out. Because if you execute that plan in your tax deferred bucket and then watch as tax rates double over time, as David Walker has predicted, then what you find is that your financial plan will only deliver about half of what your lifestyle needs require in retirement. So we have to get the tax variable right in the financial plan. So it's not just a question of figuring out how much our lifestyle need is going to be in retirement. It's basically contributing the right amount of dollars in the right types of accounts so that we can deliver on that need when the time comes somewhere down the road when you retire. The next question they ask Dr. Kotlikoff is, how do you have your own money invested? And he says, it seems to me that the stock market is overvalued and dependent on the Federal Reserve support and its commitment to low interest rates. And I view that as an unsupportable policy. So I view the stock market as very risky. About half of my assets are in cash because I think this is a very tricky investment climate. He says, I pulled out of the market when COVID hit and the market dropped. And I was very proud of myself, but I didn't expect the Fed would come back in and support the corporate bond market to the extent it did. All right, here's my take. First of all, I'm not a real big fan of market timing. And here's why. You might figure out the perfect time to get out of the market, but you have to also figure out the perfect time to get back into the market. Okay, so market timing says, I'm going to get out of the market before the market crashes, and then I'm going to get back into the market right before the market starts to recover. Statistically speaking, this is nearly impossible to do in just the right way. You'll find that over the course of a given year, that 80% of the rise in the market for that year happened in like 6 to 8 calendar days. And so you have to be incredibly clairvoyant to be able to figure out what these 6 to 8 days are. And most people can't do it. And so Dr. Kotlikoff may have gotten it right just prior to the COVID hit, but that may be just an outlier. It's certainly not something that the average American should be trying to do. Second, how should you, according to Power Zero paradigm, how should you allocate your portfolio in retirement? Do you do all stocks? Do you do all bonds? Does that balance change as you move forward in retirement? And my response is this, and this is something that I really fleshed out in Tax-Free Income for Life. If you can guarantee your lifestyle expenses, your basic nut that you have to crack in retirement, basic living expenses, if you can do that with your Social Security pension, and or a guaranteed lifetime income annuity, then you can actually afford to take a lot more risk in the stock market than you think, regardless of economic conditions. How does that work? Well, if your basic lifestyle needs are met, you would only tap into your stock market portfolio to pay for discretionary expenses, which is the expenses above and beyond what your normal, regular lifestyle would require. In my book, I call these shock expenses and aspirational expenses. Shock expenses are, hey, you need a new carburetor in your car. The roof has a hole in it. Unforeseen medical expenses or family expenses. Aspirational expenses are, hey, you want to take the grandkids to Disney World or take the trip around the world. So here's a rule of thumb. If the stock market is down in the year in which you need to dip into your savings to pay for those discretionary expenses, I would suggest that instead of tapping into your stock market portfolio during that year, tap into your LIRP. Why? Because the LIRP is growing safely and productively, and you're not going to experience the double dip of first, the market goes down and then you're taking money out of your assets while the market is down. That can sort of send your assets into a death spiral from which it never comes. But in the down years, and this is typically in years 10 plus in your retirement, take money out of your LIRP to meet those discretionary expense needs. And then that gives the stock market a chance to recover. Then when the stock market is up, access the stock market to meet your discretionary needs in those years. So there's sort of a formula to follow here. And what that does is it gives you a permission slip to take a lot of risk in your stock market portfolio. You can really invest in a pedal to the metal, high octane stock market portfolio if you have your living expenses guaranteed. It gives you a permission slip, as it were, to take much more risk in the stock market. All right, the article continues by asking Dr. Kotlikoff. They say millions of Americans claim Social Security early so that they can get back all the money they put in. Do they have it wrong? So the question here is basically, when should people take Social Security? He responds, well, it's kind of like reducing the money you spend on your homeowner's insurance to make sure you won't lose money if your house doesn't burn down. It's a twist of logic. So they do have it wrong. If you're 90 and you're alive, you're going to be very happy that you waited until 70 to start collecting a 76% higher check than if you were 62. Just like if your house burns down, you're going to be very happy you bought that homeowner's insurance. This needs to be understood as buying insurance against one of the biggest financial risks we face, which is living too long and outliving your money. So basically, Dr. Kotlikoff says, push off taking Social Security as long as you can, because the longer you take it off, the more you're going to be able to take out. And Social Security, at the end of the day, helps to mitigate longevity risk, which I agree with. However, the key here in determining when you should take Social Security really comes down to how long you're going to live. And so if you want to figure out when you should take your Social Security, you have to have a way of predicting how long you're going to live. Why? Because the longer you're going to live, the longer you should wait to draw Social Security. It's a simple mathematical formula. There's a literal crossover point where if you're going to live this long, let's call it, say, age 81 or older, it makes sense to push off taking Social Security as long as possible, at least until age 70. Now, this, of course, begs the question, and people always ask this, well, how are you supposed to know how long you're going to live? By the way, the last thing you want to do is push Social Security off until age 70, and then you die at age 71, because you put all this money in, you didn't get any money out. And just like with an annuity, your money is going to pay for someone else's Social Security benefits. So really, I believe the best way to predict how long you're going to live is to go through the LIRP underwriting process. Why? Because life insurance underwriters are in the business of predicting how long you're going to live. If they do a lousy job at predicting how long you're going to live, then insurance companies lose a lot of money. In fact, when they accept you with a good rating, meaning they think that you're going to live a long life, they're basically putting money on the line and they're betting that you aren't going to die prematurely, that you're going to live past average life expectancy. So they have money invested in the process. So if the underwriter comes back and says, hey, you are going to live a long life, you're going to live to be 85, 90, and they give you one of those top LIRP ratings, like a preferred plus or preferred or what have you, then that's a good indication that you're going to live a nice, long, healthy life. And you should push Social Security off as long as you can. And I think that spending down some of your assets in the interim to be able to last long enough to get to age 70 or whenever it is you're planning on getting Social Security, I think it can make some sense to spend those assets because it's such an increase in your Social Security payment by pushing those years off. They then ask, is paying off your mortgage early smart? I've had friends tell me they're not doing it because they could earn more in the stock market. Dr. Kotlikoff responds. He says, ask them if they had paid off their mortgage, would they turn around and borrow money and put it in the stock market? They would never do it. So it's an irrational statement they're making to you. I think that I understand what Dr. Kotlikoff is saying, but I think that I look at this a different way. I don't think that this is how it plays out in real life. The question that we're really asking here is, should we be taking money that we could otherwise invest in the stock market and use it to prematurely pay down our mortgage balance? In other words, pay above and beyond our normal principal and interest payment and apply that to the balance of your mortgage. Let me give you an analogy to help illustrate how I would respond to this. Let's say you got a rich Uncle Louie, and that rich Uncle Louie dies and leaves you $50,000. You got two choices of what you can do with that $50,000. You can take that $50,000 and invest it in the stock market at 8%, or you could pay down a credit card debt of $50,000, which is costing you 15%. What would you do? Well, most people say they would pay off the credit card. And I say, why? And they say, because no matter how well the stock market grows, if it's only ever going to be 8%, it's never going to really catch up with the interest that I'm paying on that credit card. So it's what we call an arbitrage. You're losing 7% by not paying off the credit card. So then I changed a little bit the parameters of the question. I say, let's say you inherit $50,000 from your rich Uncle Louie, and you can use that $50,000 to invest in the stock market at 8%, or pay off a mortgage that's costing you 3.5%. By the way, that mortgage is tax deductible. So when you net out the tax savings, it's really only costing you 2.5%. What would you do now? And they say, well, I would probably invest it in the stock market. And you say, why? Because there's an arbitrage there. If the true cost of your mortgage is 2.5% and you can grow your money at 8% in the market, that's a 5.5% delta. So it's a 5.5% arbitrage that you would be losing out on if you used it to prematurely pay down your mortgage. So I am not a big fan of taking money out of IRAs to pay down your mortgage or taking money out of other investments to pay off your mortgage. I think that the math doesn't really add up. They then ask, do Roth IRA conversions make sense? He says they do and they don't. You have to be careful. If you convert too much, you may actually raise your taxes rather than lower them. You want to convert in years when your tax bracket is relatively low compared with your future years. If people are taking Social Security early, doing Roth conversions can kick up their Social Security benefits taxation. It could raise their Medicare premium. It's a delicate calculation to figure out when and how much to convert, and it involves all these moving parts. So I agree totally with Dr. Kotlikoff here. It really 100% comes down to where you think your tax bracket will be down the road when you're planning on taking this money out. If you think, as I do, that we are in a rising tax rate environment, then it makes sense to cash in on today's historically low tax rate so you can get those dollars systematically repositioned at tax-free to avoid having to pay taxes at a point in the future when tax rates could be dramatically higher than they are today. And let me address the Social Security taxation and the higher Medicare premium. First of all, I don't think you should be drawing Social Security during your conversion period, because that will cause Social Security taxation and you're locking in at a lower Social Security amount. As far as paying a higher Medicare premium, let me put it to you this way. If the cost of getting your retirement savings off the train tracks to avoid a doubling of tax rates over time is to pay taxes at historically low tax rates, and in the process, you might add another $100 or $200 to your Medicare premium per month along the way, is it worth paying that extra money to avoid having to pay a doubling of tax rates on your retirement balances potentially somewhere down the road? And so it's, in other words, are we tripping on pennies on the way to dollars? And I would submit that in some cases, we do that when we fixate on potentially having to pay more for our Medicare premium. The last question they ask is, they say, you have a book coming out that promises to give an economist's secrets to more money, less risk, and a better life. Can you dish on these secrets? And he says, well, there are secrets for all stages of the life cycle. The first secret, he says, so there are secrets like shack up with mom to save on housing costs. And, my response to that is, I'm cool with that. Save money however you can. And if that means, moving in with your mom, to save money so that you can pocket more down the road and maybe afford to buy a house once you've got a nice nest egg. I'm totally cool with that. He says, don't borrow for college. And the reason he says that is because 40% of people who borrow for college actually never finish college. So I would say borrow for college. The cost of borrowing for college is not all that expensive. And it, in theory, gives you a commensurate increase in your wages over time that can help offset the cost of the borrowing. That's a bit of a personal decision. I'm somewhat agnostic on that, but certainly don't borrow if you think there's a high likelihood that you could drop out early without experiencing the increased ability to win bacon over time as a result of having a college education. I think that increasingly having a college education is less and less relevant to being able to earn a living. I mean, ask any of these guys, Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and a lot of these people in the blue collar industries are making a lot more money than the philosophy major does when they graduate from school. He says, number 3, take money from your IRA to pay off your mortgage. I'm absolutely averse to this idea, and I think I've explained why in the analogy I gave earlier. And he says, invest. The last one he says is invest more in stocks as you age in retirement. I love this idea, particularly if you have guaranteed your basic living expenses by way of Social Security, a pension, guaranteed lifetime income. Absolutely take more risk in your stocks, particularly if you have that LIRP that you can draw from to pay for discretionary expenses during the down years, giving your stock market portfolio the chance. All right, so that is it for today. I love Dr. Kotlikoff. I loved what he said when he was on our program. I got a lot of great feedback about the 2 podcast episodes where he was on. He makes a lot of sense, particularly when discussing all of the things that could potentially drive tax rates higher over time and really what's ailing our country and what we need to do to fix the problems in our country. Got a lot of really good feedback on his interview. As far as his ideas on personal financial planning, obviously I've got a bone or two to pick with him over a number of issues, but largely I think he's obviously a very bright guy that has a lot of interesting and thoughtful ideas on how we should be preparing for retirement and living in retirement. If you need help navigating any of these issues, of course, head over to davidmcknight.com. Happy to refer you to a member of our elite POZ advisor group. Among the top 40 tax-free retirement specialists in the nation, all have been trained, vetted, qualified personally by me. If you're an advisor and want to integrate these concepts into your practice, head over to powerzero.com, opt into the video series. We're happy to set a phone appointment with you to discuss further. Would appreciate a follow on Twitter. It's at McKnight & Co., at McKnight & Co., or on Instagram, David C. McKnight. Thanks all for being part of the show, and we look forward to chatting with you same time next week.